Before I start talking about marine litter and citizen science, I would like to ask all of you to think about whether you at some point have participated in any citizen science activity about marine litter. And if you could write that, what you did, if you did participate and where you did it in the chat, that would be wonderful. Then at some point we could check who has participated in what activities. So just write in the chat, I participated in that activity in this place. That would be great. So now, jumping into my talk, I want to tell you that you have a very lucky day because you have, oops, why can I not move forward here? There it is. You have today the opportunity not only to listen to one talk, but to 3 talks. So you get 3 talks for one. And in my first talk, I will give you a little bit an introduction to citizen science, how we got into this business of doing citizen science about marine litter. Then in my second talk, I will give you a little bit of a few warnings about things that you need to keep in mind if you want to do citizen science. And in my last talk, I will talk to you about the potential that citizen science can have, especially in the context of marine litter. So let's jump into our first talk, which is about marine litter research in the Southeast Pacific. And I will tell you a little bit how we got to start studying marine litter together with school children. So we are actually marine biologists, and we study this kind of thing. What you see here is floating kelps, giant kelp that float along the coast, and with it transport a lot of organisms, and that process is what we mostly have been studying. But doing this research and looking for these floating kelps, we actually also immediately came across floating litter. And then when we traveled along the Chilean coast, we saw that there is litter everywhere, and there seems to be a problem. But when we asked what is known about this, basically we found that no information is that there it is, and nobody knew anything. There was no scientific information. But when we look at the type of litter, we could immediately think this litter is not coming from somewhere else with the currents. This litter seems to be a homemade litter. And so we basically were thinking, well, if it's coming from Chile, then we need to do something in Chile. And so in 2007, we founded this initiative, which we call Litter Scientists. And together with school children, we are looking at litter, we are studying the litter, where it's coming from, what it's doing, what organisms are associated with litter, with this litter, and all these things. And so we have 3 main objectives in this citizen science program. The first is to contribute to scientific education of the school children. The second objective is to generate useful information about marine litter. And the third objective is to foster environmental awareness among the participating school children, but also among the other people, their parents, their families, friends, and also the general public. So we have then this network of 30 to 40 schools that cover basically the entire Chilean coast, and together with them we have over the last 12 years done annually research about particular topics of marine related to marine litter. And of course, since we are working with school children, we need to ask simple questions. And one of the questions is, what kind of litter is out there? So just recording the types of litter that you can find. The next question that we are very interested in, where does this litter come from? Because if we want to do something about it, we need to know where it's coming from. That question is actually quite complicated, but you can also try to simplify the question and the answers. So for example, if you look here at this screen, you can see two bottles. Here is this red plastic bottle, and here in this small insert, there is this glass bottle. And if I ask you now, which of these two bottles has been coming from farther away, the answer is very easy, right? You can see that the bottle here, the glass bottle in this small frame, is a bottle that must have come with marine currents, because it has here a lot of marine organisms growing on it. And we rarely find this kind of bottles along the Chilean coast. So that gives us an indication, if we have something like this, very clean without organisms, then we can think it probably did not come with the currents. So it probably came from very local sources. And that's a very, very important response, because if you know that all your litter has local sources, then you know where you need to act and where you can act. So that's depending on where you are along the world's coast, you find more or less of this litter with these marine organisms. And now I would like to all of you to think about, when you went to the beach the last few times, what you found, what kind of litter you saw, and if you have ever seen litter that has these organisms here growing on it. We call these organisms lepas. They are crustaceans like the barnacles that attach to floating things here. And if you see those and they are this big, you can know this has come from far away. So I would like to ask all of you to think about whether you ever found some litter that had this kind of organisms growing on it. And if you did, then please in the chat, send this information: the country where you found this, the place, the city, the nearest city or the main place that where this was, and what kind of litter it was, whether it was a plastic thing, plastic buoy or plastic bottle that had these organisms, in this case lepas. If you didn't see these organisms but others, then just write, for example, plastic bottle with other organisms. So think about your last visit to the beach and write to us what kind of litter with organisms you have found and where. That's very important. We are very interested in this. We will make a little game in the end. So please send this information. So now going back, so we have these simple questions, and now moving forward, working with school children is also very important to motivate them. And so we have these environmental storybooks that are somehow related to the research that we are doing. For example, here the last one that we have is called The Journey of Hurella and the Microplastics, that introduced to our research about microplastics, which we did a couple of years ago. And so each child that participates in the program gets his or her own copy of this book. And at the beginning of the year, we read these stories together, and then we ask them whether they are interested in participating in the research and to know whether on their beaches there are also microplastics. Then we have very simple introductory stories that introduce to the specific research topic and explain how the research will be done. We have simple schemes of the sampling sites and how the sampling will be done. Very simple data table that everybody can easily fill out. Even school children that don't have university education can complete these tables. And so we have a standardized methodology that everybody is using the same methodology. And that's very important, because doing that we can then go about, and in different places, different people can do the sampling, and we can compare. And we can, for example, answer questions like this one: which are the cleanest or the dirtiest beaches from Chile? And we did this for the first time in 2008. We repeated that in 2012 and also in 2016. And so not only can we compare across a long coast here, more than 4,000 kilometers, but we can also compare now across different years. And so if we look at our results here, you can see here the units is litter items per square meter. And you can see here on the top, in the northern part of Chile, we have an area where we have really very serious problems, where we consistently, in every sampling, have the highest densities of litter. So this region, Antofagasta, has very serious problems. And if we compare over time, we can see that there's not much change going on. So even though we have been doing work and outreach and many, many other organizations, not much seemed to have happened over these 8 years that we are looking at here. So these are very important results that can help us also to advise decision makers in what could be done and where action is really urgently needed. So all this information, we share it, of course, with the people, first of all, with the school children who participated. So at the end of each research, we prepare these reports and we share them with the school children, with the teachers, of course, who then share it with their class. We also share it with our scientific colleagues, because as you may remember, in the beginning, we had no scientific information in Chile. And so over the years, we have generated important scientific information, which we also share with the media and with the general public, because we want people to know what the situation is about and what should be done. And of course, we also ask this question now, knowing that we have a problem and where we have this problem and where this problem is coming from, what can we do? So we encourage the children, first of all, to share their results, for example, in science fairs, to go and share it with other school children, with the general public, to tell them what they found in their research. But we also encourage them to think about possible solutions and encourage other people also to change something maybe in their daily life, because we are all part of this problem. And so we encourage them to reduce the use of single-use plastics. We encourage them to reuse, or as the very latest least option, to recycle, which we all know is not the best option. So reduce is what we most encourage. And we also encourage them to dream, because if you want to achieve something, you also need to have dreams. And so since we have learned that all our litter is coming from local sources along the Chilean coast, we ask them whether we want to have the cleanest beaches of the world. Because if we want to achieve that, it only depends on ourselves. And so we encourage them to dream and to take actions, and to get more people involved. And last not least, the other thing that we always try to encourage is that citizen science is fun. It's important, it's an important thing, but it's also fun. And so with this, we come to the end of our first talk. And now we jump to our second talk, in which I will tell you a little bit of what we have been doing the last 2 years. And related to this, I will give you a few warnings about things that you need to keep in mind when you want to do citizen science in general, or citizen science about marine litter. And it's very important that in these projects, you are working in a team, so you have different people working together. They all bring their strengths to the project and make your project better. There's always a diversity of people that work together in these projects will always make your project better. So that's very important to keep in mind. And the particular project I want to talk to you about is located now here in the East Pacific, which is where we are working. And you can see here this image is from a database that is called LitterBase. This database has all the information about marine litter. Everything that has ever been published about marine litter is available in this database. So you can also look at it and see for your part of the world what is known about marine litter in your part of the world. So if we look at this map, we can see here in the southern part of the East Pacific, there's a lot of green and pink dots. This is the Chilean coast where we have been working for many years together with the citizen science program. And so we have generated a lot of relevant information about marine litter. We have shared this with the people, and the decision makers have been taking their stakes. And here you see our president basically promoting the ban of single-use plastic bags and encouraging the use of reusable bags. So something has been achieved. But if you look now at the other countries of the East Pacific, you see that north of Chile, there is actually a few dots, but not much is known. We have basically an extensive area of many thousands of kilometers where really nothing is known about marine litter, and where we therefore also don't know where this litter is coming from. So there's an important gap in knowledge. And with this project that we started like in 2018, we want to leap this gap. We want to fill this gap of knowledge. And so the main objective of this project, where we expanded this program to these other countries, all the way up to Mexico, is to generate information and strategies to mitigate the marine litter problem in all these countries that share the same ocean, the East Pacific Ocean. And now I will tell you a few things that we need to keep in mind when we do this kind of project. So first of all, it's a very large area now. We are talking from Chile all the way to Mexico. If you take this scale and put it on your continent, actually it's stretching not only all the way along the Atlantic coast of Africa, but it's also going all the way to Northern Europe. So it's a very large area. And so we have here about 40 schools. It's a little bit variable. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little bit less, but from 11 different countries. The good thing is that all these countries share the same language, Spanish, and also the same Latin American culture. So that's very good. But in all these countries, there are also different realities, starting with the climate, with the economy, with the social level, and all these things. And so it's very important to maintain the contact. And so you have to invest a lot of energy and time in communication. So you need to communicate very regularly with your participants in this program to make sure that they are all in the same boat. The other thing that is very important here is that you are working together with other people. And in our particular case, we are working with school children. So you need to make sure that they all agree with what you are doing together with them. And so in our particular case, we need the consent from the children themselves, but of course also from their parents. And that's also taking a lot of effort. And so the coordinator of the program, who actually only communicated with the school teachers, not with the children or not with the parents, but to get all these consents from the children and their parents, there were at least 300 emails that we estimate roughly from our office going back and forth to the schools and to our office. So it's also a lot of effort to do this. And then, of course, you need a lot of materials, working materials, to work together with the children. There's the introductory material, training materials, and then, of course, the research guides. And also, preparing and testing all these working materials takes a lot of time and effort. So, and then you need to curate and check your data and samples. And validating your data also requires a lot of time, something that you need to keep in mind, because with those data, then you want to do something. Here, for example, the first thing that we always do is have a small, brief, and relatively simple report in which we summarize all the findings and share them first with the schools, but then also with the general public. And then, of course, you give feedback to your participants, which is very important for them, because that will keep them motivated, that will show them that something is happening with the information that they have generated. And also, the other thing is that you want to do is use this information to respond scientific questions. So that is also taking a lot of effort. And so the main lesson of all this, the last few slides, all this is a lot of work. And that is, you need to keep in mind if you do citizen science. It's not that you create a web page and your citizen scientists come running and want to work with you. Nowadays, there's lots of initiatives, and you need to work very closely with your citizens in these projects. And you also need to be attentive to what they are looking for from these projects. So it's a lot of work, and it needs a lot of passion among the people who do these citizen science projects. And that's the lesson from my second talk. And with this now, we jump into the third talk of this morning or this day, where we're going to look at marine litter and citizen science as an opportunity. And when we look at the oceans, we know that there's a lot of challenges, that the oceans are facing a lot of problems. We know that there's lots of scientists who examine these potential problems and who try to evaluate these problems to inform decision makers. We learn now that scientists sometimes have contrasting viewpoints. We have learned this especially during the last few months. Everybody has seen that not all scientists agree about what should be done with respect to the pandemic that we are facing these days. So very often you don't have a unique recommendation where everybody can say, this is what we're going to do. And so you have often, in order to get regulations that are useful to regulate these problems, you have lengthy discussions. Often these discussions happen only among the experts, out of sight of the general public. And so regulations are sometimes delayed because there are conflicting interests. Not everybody agrees on things, and this is especially bad if there's no public debate, if the people cannot participate in the decision-making process. And so these problems persist over time, and no solutions are being found. And that is especially true for many problems that the oceans are facing, which is a natural thing, because especially the open ocean is an area that belongs to everybody, or in a way belongs to nobody. And so we have a lot of problems that the oceans are facing and for which we don't have yet a real solution. For example, we know the oceans are warming up, they are becoming more acidic. There's a lot of invasive species that are invading the coasts. Many areas of the oceans are overfished. The very serious problems in many areas of the world's oceans. The interactions between land and sea are changed, and that of course also is an important threat to coastal ecosystems. And then during the last 30, 40 years, we also increasingly face this gigantic problem of marine litter. So there's all these problems, and what do people, the normal people like you and me, think about these problems? And it's very interesting, because if we would value these problems from a scientific point of view, maybe the result would be different. But if you ask people, it's very interesting that people, among all these problems, climate change, pollution, habitat destruction, invasive species or biodiversity, that's a problem that people consider most serious is plastic in the ocean. So it's a problem that is important to many, many people. And so what is it? Why is that? Why does that happen, that people are so concerned about marine litter? Well, first of all, you have seen all these figures. We see that the production of plastic has been increasing and increasing, and you see these figures in different forms or in different shapes. Here's another figure showing the same curve. So you see this dramatic increase over the last 30 to 40 years. And you can see here that also the activities, the human concerns have been changing. And in the 80s, people became aware that this litter is not going away, but that it's accumulating in natural habitats. And so in 1986, the first international coastal cleanup was done. And I don't know whether this is a good moment to ask Tara whether some people have mentioned that they participated in marine litter citizen science. Can you look at have you looked at the chat, and have you some info? Do you have some information? Please go ahead.
Yes, Martin, there have been quite a few responses. Carol said that she's participated in recording marine activities and using the litter app called eOceans. Anya from the Beach Co-op says, I've coordinated many cleanups in Cape Town, PE, Durban, and Madagascar using the Dirty Dozen methodology. Maya says, I've participated in litter cleanups on beaches and rocky shores, from which the data was collected around the coast of South Africa and in Namibia. Veronica has said that I participated in a beach cleanup after a hurricane in Belize at a sea turtle index beach. Alma said that the NOAA marine debris accumulation study with the students and citizens in Louisiana, USA. There was a comment from the Ocean Conservancy that says I've participated and hosted cleanups for the International Coastal Cleanup in many locations, Washington, D.C., and Miami in the USA primarily. There have been some more comments saying I participated in citizen science activities, but not in marine science. I participated in monthly beach cleanups along Durban Harbour, along with science awareness activities in small groups with UKZN South Africa. That's Seviwe. Nozi commented saying that collected litter data during the International Coastal Cleanup. Alma said Elmer's Island, Louisiana, barnacles on plastic bottles and glass bottles. There's one from Masha that says, I'm part of the Blue Port project run by Wild Oceans in South Africa. We clean up the Durban Harbour daily. There are quite a few other ones as well. Do you want to hear the rest, or just a snippet?
No, that's good. That just gives us a very good impression of what people have been doing, and I think it's great that so many people have been participating in these initiatives, and we can see, that there's a lot of initiatives where people try to combine the two things, clean up the coast, leave the coast cleaner, and at the same time generate scientific information. So there's a lot of things happening, and I would like to use this moment also as a reminder. If you have not, there was somebody who mentioned, who sent some information about litter that they found on the beach. I think it was Louisiana, right? A bottle with barnacles. So that is very good. Please, everybody else, if you haven't reported or haven't sent one of the beaches where you found litter together with organisms, please do it now, so that you can participate also in our little game. So let's continue then with our third talk, and let's look. We have seen many people have participated in cleanup samplings where people clean up the beach and at the same time generate scientific information. There's a lot of other studies going on where people participate in scientific research. There have been over the last few years a number of studies that were dedicated to microplastics. For example, here is a very interesting project where a Japanese colleague has asked people from all over the world. You can see here the map from where he has received samples from all over the world of these industrial pellets that you can see here in the hands of the people on the lower right. And these pellets, like all other plastics that are floating in the seawater, they absorb contaminants. And that's also one of the main concerns that people have, that these contaminants, if organisms ingest these plastics that now are loaded with these contaminants, could get released and then be taken up by the organisms. So this colleague actually, in order to find out how polluted are different areas with these contaminants, he asked people from everywhere to collect these pellets and send them to him, and he then analyzed them together with his team for these contaminants. And so many people have participated in this, and there's also a number of other studies here, another example that have looked at microplastics. And so if we look at the world map here, I show you a map from more than 5 years ago where we summarized all the studies that at that time we knew about. Where in the upper screen you can see marine litter research where citizens have participated. So you can see there was already more than 5 years ago global coverage. So people have participated everywhere. That basically also is very similar to what professionals have achieved. And in some cases, the citizen science is even better, has achieved better coverage than what professionals have achieved. And this, like I say, was 5 years ago. Now this map actually would look quite different and would have a much higher coverage. So the important thing, people have participated in this all over the world and helped to improve our knowledge about marine litter. So the general public participates actively in marine litter science. And why is that important? Because people, in a way, are concerned about plastic, and plastic also is part of their everyday life. So if you look here, for example, the associations that people have with plastic is in the red case, it's bad, pollution, waste, environment, rubbish, but also there is associations that are either neutral or positive. So for example, plastic bags or plastic bottles. And you can see here from the position of the word plastic bag is an item, that an association that many people have when they hear about plastic. And so there's a lot of concern also about plastic bags. And now I will show you very briefly for a few minutes an example that we have tried to dissect out from Chile over the last few years. So if you look here, you can see a timeline of plastic bag use in Chile. And you can see here that plastic bags really um, in the 70s, like 50 years ago, there were no plastic bags in use anywhere in Chile. Nobody knew plastic bags and people were not using them. And then during the 70s and 80s, the supermarkets were coming, were basically expanding. And with the supermarkets, we also got more and more of these plastic bags. And you can see here the production of plastic bags over those years from 1970 until 2010, especially until 2000. More and more companies that produce plastic bags were founded in Chile. And at the same time, also, we have the first observations of floating plastic litter in marine waters from Chile. Then you can see here that the production of plastic bags during the last decade, or during the first decade of the new millennium, between 2000 and 2010, has been high and has been still continuously increasing. But during the same time, there was also a first study that noticed that a lot of these floating plastics actually are these single-use plastic bags. Then in 2006, also, there was the first participation in Chile in the international coastal cleanup. Before that year, people didn't know about the coastal cleanup. Now many people participate every year. Then in 2008, what you have seen in my first talk, if you remember that, we did the first national sampling of beach litter. This is the first time that we had information about beach litter. And with that, then we go into the last and into the decade that we are basically ending right now. And you can see here in the beginning of this decade, there were already a lot of NGOs that were concerned about plastic pollution. We can see here that the physical production was still at a relatively high level. And we can also see that I need to move my screen here a little bit, that actually in 2013, a very important thing happened. The first municipality from Chile basically generated a decree in which they banned single-use plastic bags within this municipality. And now I need to, yeah, now I can go. So, and you can see here in this screen that just popped up that over the last few years, more and more municipalities have joined this first municipality. And so, like in the year 2000, I can't really see that, but it should be 13, 14, 15, 16. I think in 2019, we had more than 60 municipalities that had actually banned the single-use plastic bags in their area. And during the same time, other scientific studies were done that showed that a lot of plastic is in the environment. Surveys among the people showed that actually there's a lot of support to restrict or ban these single-use plastic bags, and these percentages of people who support the ban of these single-use plastic bags has increased over time. And so in parallel with that, several laws have been implemented that actually helped to improve the situation. And finally, last year, the law came into force that banned single-use plastic bags from supermarkets. So now there is no more plastic bags if you go to a supermarket in Chile, you don't receive a single-use plastic shopping bag. So things have happened. And if you want to read on this development, there's this publication that you can find on our website, or you can write to us. In this publication, we have dissected this process, and basically we have reached this conclusion that what has happened here was that we had a broad coalition of many different actors who were concerned about the problem and who have first independently worked on this, shared then the information with the media, and reached better communication among themselves, have also then engaged in communication with decision makers, especially from the municipal level, have basically enhanced this process. And so with this broad and informal coalition over time, we have reached this new law. And this is something that we think is very important, that citizen science can contribute to this bottom-up process. This is very important. This is a process that comes from the bottom up, from the people. And but we know that plastic pollution is only one problem. What happens with all the other challenges, overfishing, acidification, climate change? And there is scientists who are concerned that now, you know, all the focus, because whatever you read is about plastics. And so they are concerned that actually this focus on plastics distracts from other more important things, like climate change, for example, or ocean acidification, or overfishing. And while you could say this could be the case, we actually think that marine litter is an opportunity, because different than things like overfishing or ocean acidification, it's a problem that everybody can see, and where everybody can start to act on in their area, in their small turf. And so we think that plastic litter is actually a good opportunity to get people involved, to get people engaged, to become not only citizen scientists, but also active citizens who participate in the decision-making process, and who have an opinion, and who share this opinion, and who also take action themselves. So we view this as a very good opportunity to engage the people in the decision-making process. And by getting people involved, we also think that anything is possible and that change can be made. And that's the end of my third talk for this morning.
Thanks, Martin. That was great. Very interesting to hear all three of the points that you got across. If anyone has any questions as well, feel free to tap those in the chat too. There was a comment from Diamela that says, hi, Chile has banned plastic shopping bags, the first country in South America to do so, but Chile has not banned all the single-use plastics.
That's absolutely true. And we think that the plastic bag ban is only a small first step, that a lot of other steps need to follow, and that in particular, it is very important to get the industry involved. And involved means the industry needs to obey to certain rules. And one of the important rules here is the extended producer responsibility. Basically, we have the law on paper here in Chile, and it's currently in discussion, but it has not been implemented. And we think that this is the next and very important step, because at this moment, The industry basically produces these single-use plastics in many different sectors, not only plastic bags, but we also have a lot of plastic spoons and whatever, plastic cups. Yes, so that's a very important next step, basically.
There have been some comments from Alma that says that's a huge step. Most places have not banned any single-use plastics. And Anya said that extended producer responsibility is very necessary, and the same issue is here in South Africa. There was a question earlier that said that that referred to Chile being the first country to ban single-use plastic bags. Do you know if any other South American countries have followed suit?
Yes, there's more and more countries following suit. I know that Ecuador is advancing or has been advancing very rapidly. And I know that also Colombia has in some areas of the country already banned single-use plastic bags. I think that in Costa Rica, things are also moving in that direction, and probably I think I probably do injustice to many other countries where I don't really know the details. So if somebody else is here from other countries, maybe they could say something. But there is a general movement in that direction.
There was another comment from Alma that says that New Orleans and Los Angeles are starting sustainable festivals which ban single-use plastic there with a grant from the EPA. Then a comment from Sushma that says, in Mauritius, single-use plastic is banned in supermarkets and local vegetable markets since 2015. Enforcement is a problem, especially in local markets. Plastic is still the highest component in beach litter surveys. Martin, I have a question. Earlier, I think in your second talk, you spoke about a survey where the public said that the most concerning threat was marine litter. Can you expand at all on how they sampled that and whether people linked the because I saw the second option was waste. So I wondered if they linked the waste to marine litter at all.
Yeah, actually, I have to admit that I can't give you the details on that. I think actually this, if I remember that correctly, was an online survey. The details of the survey, I can't respond to that question, but I can send you the reference, and so you can look it up.
Okay, thanks. That would be great. I see we have another question that says, thank you, Martin, for such an in-depth presentation. I certainly agree that the bottom-up approach is vital, but with the observation you made on one of the slides, the public not being involved out of sight, what would be your advice on the way forward for citizen science projects facing similar challenges?
Well, I think the most important thing here is communication and feedback. So basically, you need to share all the information that you generate with your citizens, but also with your participants, but also with the general public, and also with the decision makers. And of course, it depends very much on the project that you are doing. Of course, in the context of marine litter, basically there is a lot of information that can be very relevant. And you should also try to have a clear scientific question, but also have the applied science aspect. So there's a lot of research that can be done, basic research that that will not translate into any relevant political decisions. And so you need to focus the research that you are doing and directing it in a way that it can help support the decision making process. That's very important.
Thanks, Martin. There's a comment from Haley that says, please Google Rethink the Bag, which is an environmental campaign, the Two Oceans Aquarium in South Africa, from the Two Oceans Aquarium in South Africa, to also ban the plastic shopping bag. Thank you. Then a comment from Maria that in Tanzania, single-use plastic is banned too. Then there's a question from Eunice that says, did Chile have a tax on single-use plastics before going on to ban plastic bags? The debate in South Africa is that the taxing might be more realistic than a complete ban, but studies from various countries have shown that tax does not change behavior and plastic pollution. Can you comment on that, Martin?
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's a very important point. So we didn't have a tax on single-use plastics, and it's also very unlikely that this is going to come. And I would have responded exactly the same thing, that many studies have shown that taxes may achieve a short-term change, but not really a profound change in behavior. It's just like if you think about smoking or alcohol or all these other things, you know, the taxes are very, very high on these things in most countries. The taxes on tobacco or alcohol in many countries are among the highest taxes that you have. Yet, nevertheless, people continue to smoke. Maybe at some when the prices are increasing, they stop for a moment, but then they continue. So we think that you need to look for other strategies, and that also whatever is been done needs to go deeper and needs to basically pervade all sectors of society. And like I always like to say, you know, the International Coastal Cleanup is nice, but it's only one day of the year. And I like to say every day is International Coastal Cleanup. You know, you can't think it's just like you also don't brush your teeth only one day every year. You do it every day. And so we need to achieve a different way of approaching things, taking more responsibility for our environment. And personally, I think that what is happening right now is revolutionary, or changing our perspective about life. You know, the pandemics that we are facing right now. And while there's a lot of course, things that we perceive as negative, and of course, people dying is not a good thing. But on the other hand, everything that's happening is also an opportunity to rethink our way of life. And it is very important to also think about this way. And yeah.
Very, very true. It's quite interesting with the pandemic. I think it'll be interesting to find out what kind of trends there are in terms of the data that people will be conducting now with different surveys. There was a comment on Eunice's question from Shushma that says there was a tax on single-use plastics in Mauritius. However, this did not help to change behavior. So this was followed by a ban. Then there was a comment from Solange that says, excellent presentation, Martin. Is it true if we can get people from communities to get involved in coastal cleanings and change their plastic consumption habits, we will be able to make a change until they become national, regional, and global laws? In Ecuador, more and more coastal cleanings are being carried out, getting communities involved in these activities.
That's definitely true. Getting people involved on that side, you know, is I think is important to raise awareness. But we need to keep in mind that cleaning up the mess is not really the best strategy if we don't stop this tsunami of single-use plastics that's still invading our everyday life. And so we should basically promote a lifestyle that is focused on reusable items. And I know that this is a very, very difficult thing to say in the face of the current crisis, where we have, for obvious reasons, single-use items being promoted for health reasons, but there's also many different aspects in our daily life where we can use reusable items, and that's something that we should promote.
Thanks, Martin. There's a question from Veronica that says, do the schools in Chile that participate in the study have recycling measures in place? And do they encourage no or limited use of plastic within the school? Do you work with school directors to achieve this? And thank you, Dr. Martin, excellent presentation. So a few questions there.
So yes, we try to do that, just to basically that this participation in the program is not just a single activity, but is also something that is pervading all the lifestyle in the schools. And many of the schools that we participating or that are participating in the program are in how you call it, in a green certification program also that is being coordinated by our Ministry of the Environment. And so these schools not only participate in our program and not only are concerned about plastics and the use of plastic, but they also have, for example, a school garden, they have compost, they have social programs and other environmental programs. So they conservation of water and all these things. And but as you also know, it's sometimes very difficult to basically avoid the use of plastics, because as a consumer, sometimes we have no alternatives. For example, just as an example, if you want to buy mineral water here in Chile, you can only buy it in single-use bottles, single-use plastic bottles. There is no mineral water being sold in, for example, returnable bottles. And that's a very important thing. And that's also a dilemma that we are facing a little bit with our program. And that's why we think and insist that this needs to be an aspect that is basically in all our lives, throughout all our life. If we do these programs and we sensitize these kids to be careful about plastics, but then they go home or they go shopping and they have no choice. They can't even find products that are using less plastic, then we have a serious problem, because it's going to be very hard to take personal actions. And so this needs to be an integrated problem that needs to be tackled in an integrative manner by the entire society. And the schools, in that sense, are a part of the society. And so the schools can do something, but they can't win this battle by themselves.
Thanks, Martin. There's a comment from Elma that says, since the pandemic, marine debris has decreased significantly on Elma Island in Louisiana. And it's also impacted by a decrease in oil and gas drilling rig activity in the Gulf of Mexico. That's great to hear. It's nice to know that the pandemic has had some positive impacts, at least. Yeah. So I don't see any other questions in the chat yet. If anyone has those, please send those on. Yes. Here we go. In Uganda, there was a judicial decision that declared use of plastic bags as being incompatible with the constitutional right to a clean environment. This galvanized the government to act as statutory instrument banning use of plastic bags, but there is an enforcement challenge. In neighboring Rwanda, there is a ban on plastic bags by law that is effectively enforced. Rwanda is one of the cleanest countries in the world. Wow,
Excellent.
that's very encouraging to hear. Yes, I suppose enforcing a law is a very big part of it, and that's quite tricky to maintain. Please continue to send your questions in the chat. In the meantime, Martin, do you want to show us the map that your team's put together?
Yes, so this is actually Diamela. While I was talking, she has put together this map. And here you can see from all the different participants that have sent in information. First of all, the bottle that you see here in Brazil, just north of the name Brazil, that's the bottle that you have seen in my first talk. They had these lepers, these crustaceans on it. And you can see here, there's a lot of reports from South Africa where people have found also litter with lepers and with other organisms growing on it. Then we have here quite a number of organisms in Central America and in Ecuador. This point, anybody knows where this is other than the person who put this dot? Here we have another litter item with lepers. Where are we here? Everybody knows this is the Galapagos Islands. So we have very often these oceanic islands. They receive a lot of litter that is coming from somewhere else with the currents. And we see that in Hawaii. We also see that in the South Pacific, in Easter Island, and we also see this in the islands in the South Atlantic. And those places receive a lot of litter from elsewhere that is coming there with the currents. And so if we want to conserve, for example, places like the Galapagos Islands, we need to, of course, do the action there, but we also need to keep our coastal waters clean, because all that coastal litter in the end is coming into the open ocean. And if you want to explore that, you can go, you can go to this website. I encourage all of you to go there at some point. It's called adrift.org.au, and you can place this little rubber ducky anywhere in the ocean, and then you can see where the currents are transporting the marine litter or any other floating thing that is coming in there. It's a very interesting website that you can use to show where the litter is going. And for example, here you see in this slide this little ducky on the continental coast of Chile, and all the litter that is coming from the Chilean coast here is very quickly concentrated here in the center of the South Pacific, and Easter Island is right in the middle of this red spot. And so they receive a lot of litter that is coming from elsewhere. And we see that also here in our map with the sample from the Galapagos Island where we have received this. So you can see there is a few places where we have litter that is coming from the ocean with the ocean currents. So that's great.
Thanks, Martin. There's a question from Alma that says, will this presentation be available? Yes, the slides and the recording of the webinar will both be available on our SST site and our YouTube page. There was a comment from Dr. Sani that says the ban of plastic bags in the two landlocked countries, those would be Uganda and Rwanda mentioned earlier, they could have significant positive effects on the environment of those two countries and would continue contribute to cleaner ocean, as well as much of the plastic ends up in the River Nile, which flows through these countries, and the River Nile flows to the Mediterranean Ocean. It's very true that all the landlocked countries also have a big role to play in the transport of plastic to the ocean. There's a
Yes.
question from Sushma that says, did anyone do any genetic work to identify the species of lepus and trace its origin, whether it's endemic or an invasive one?
Yes, there have been genetic studies been done. The important thing to keep in mind that these organisms have been living in the open ocean for millions of years. They have been before plastics, living on other floating things like floating trees or floating kelps. We see them on the kelps that we study, and also on, for example, floating volcanic pumice. So they have been around and been moving around with the currents for many, many years. And so to my knowledge, they are very closely adjusted to certain current systems. And I don't know that these species have been, not these species have been transported with plastics to areas where they haven't been before, because they have been floating and being transported on floating things for millions of years before. But one thing that is happening now with species that are being transported by plastics is that in some areas where we don't have natural floating items, we have a lot of floating plastic. And so the plastic may actually become a new vector of transport in areas where before we didn't have any vectors. And there's a recent example. Many of you may remember the very destructive tsunami that we had almost 10 years ago in Japan in 2011. And with that tsunami, a lot of stuff that was on the coast and inland was basically pulled into the ocean. And then with the currents, if we go back to this slide I just showed you, here's Japan, and here this current, the North Pacific current, basically has moved a lot of this litter from the tsunami across the Pacific, across the North Pacific, and brought many hundreds of species from Japan here to the North American Pacific coast. And colleagues from North America, they have documented this arrival of these species on this floating litter. And now over the next years and decades, it will have to be observed very carefully whether some of these species that do not naturally occur here may be able to invade these communities here in North America and establish successful here in North America. What we now know is that from this tsunami debris, or with this tsunami debris, a lot of organisms have come over here, and whether they will be able to colonize, that's another question.
Thank you, Martin. If anyone has any questions and they don't have time to type them in the chat, you're welcome to either email Martin, I'm sure, or to email us at webinars@SSC Africa, and we'll be happy to pass those on to Martin.
Okay, so this is what this litter-based database has for Africa. So you can see here, there's a lot of information for South Africa. There's a lot of information here in the northern part of Africa, in the Mediterranean, which somebody mentioned. But for many other parts of Africa, we don't really have information. And that's, I think, I suspect that's where citizen science about marine litter could be very, very useful to fill these gaps here around the African continent.
That's a very valid point. Africa does tend to be quite data poor, which is quite a challenge when you're looking to prevent litter from going into the sea and you're not too sure where to start. Thanks so much, Martin. On behalf of SST, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Martin, for taking the time to present to us from all the way from Chile. It was really wonderful to hear all the exciting citizen science opportunities that your organization is running there with the schools, and it's quite encouraging the impact that citizen science could have on educating the public to the very serious threats of marine plastic litter. Thanks so much, everyone.
Well,
as Mark,
thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. And if anybody is interested in talking to us or looking at some of the materials that we have been producing or using some of the materials, please visit our website, or please just write to me or to Tara, and she can then connect to you. So we would be very happy to share all the information with you. And we are at this very moment, within the coming few days, we're going to have a children's audiobook that will be coming out, and that will be in English. We have already the Spanish version, so if you are Spanish speaking, we can already send you the link to the Spanish audiobook. But if you pay attention, in a few more days, we will have the English audiobook version of one of our stories coming out.
thanks, Martin. And I see someone has posted the link to your website in the chat. It's definitely worth taking a look. It's a very impressive website with all the educational programs as well as all the publications that have come from the research. Thanks so much, everyone. It was great to have you here today, and thanks again, Martin. You're welcome to either email Martin or us as SST. If anyone is interested, we do have another 4th webinar taking place in our Citizen Science series tomorrow. You're welcome to email us to book your spot and receive the link. Thanks, everyone. I think we should close it here for today. It was wonderful to have you all here, and thanks, Martin. It was great to hear all the work you're doing.
Oh, you are very welcome. It was a pleasure.